In the spring of 2023, Marcus and Olivia Tran purchased a modest, single-level ranch-style home nestled in the quiet hills of Las Vegas, Nevada. The price was surprisingly reasonable for the area, $386,000, and the listing had only been live for a day when Marcus jumped on it. The couple had lived in a cramped condo near downtown Henderson for 5 years, scraping by while working remote tech jobs. This house, shaded by old palms and with a small koi pond in the backyard, felt like a dream. It wasn't until after the offer was accepted that Marcus learned who had once lived there, Noriyuki Pat Morita, the actor best known for playing Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid. The realtor, a young guy named Evan who barely looked 25, mentioned it casually like trivia. Yeah, Morita owned it in the 90s. Died a while ago. Peaceful guy, I heard. Marcus, a film buff, was intrigued but not concerned. Olivia, less so. She didn't grow up watching The Karate Kid. The house had been empty for 2 years after a string of short-term tenants. An older couple before them had broken their lease early. Something about not sleeping well. They left most of the furniture, and Marcus and Olivia decided to keep some of it, especially a beautiful shoji screen that separated the small reading nook from the living room. The first week was perfect. Quiet, warm, peaceful. But by the second week, Olivia began waking up at 3:33 a.m. every night. She didn't mention it at first, just passed it off as adjustment stress. But the pattern held 3:33 a.m. every single night. She would wake up feeling like someone had whispered in her ear. Sometimes it was just her name, Olivia, soft, right against her cheek. Other times it was in Japanese, at least she thought it was Japanese. Marcus brushed it off until he, too, started waking up often to the sound of someone pacing in the hallway. He'd lie still, thinking maybe Olivia was restless. But when he checked, she'd be asleep beside him. The hallway light began turning on by itself. They replaced the switch, then the bulb. Still, it flickered on every few nights, always between 3 and 4 a.m. By June, Olivia had become withdrawn. She stopped going into the reading nook altogether. One afternoon, Marcus found her standing in front of the shoji screen, just staring at it. When he asked what she was doing, she answered without turning around. I heard someone say, Miyagi behind it. They'd begun to argue more. Sleep-deprived, stressed, and on edge, they almost considered selling. But a part of Marcus felt deeply tethered to the house. He couldn't explain why. He started watching The Karate Kid at night, over and over again, sometimes falling asleep on the couch with it playing softly. When Olivia asked why, he said, I think it helps keep him calm. One night in August, Marcus woke up not from a sound, but from the smell. A sudden, sharp scent of sake and sandalwood filled the room. Olivia wasn't beside him. The door to the hallway was ajar, and from beyond it, he heard a rhythmic knock. Not on the front door, not on the walls. From inside the closet of the guest room. He stood outside the door for a long time, heart pounding. The knocking stopped when he reached for the knob. Inside the closet, nothing but boxes, except he noticed something wedged behind the top shelf. A thin, yellowed envelope with Japanese characters on the front. Inside, a faded black and white photo. Pat Morita as a young man, standing beside a woman who looked like she hadn't smiled in decades. On the back, Yuki, forgive me. He didn't tell Olivia about it. Just hid it in the garage. That was a mistake. The next few weeks spiraled. Olivia began experiencing sleep paralysis. She said she could see an old man crouched at the foot of the bed, bowing deeply and slowly vanishing into the floor. One night, she screamed so loudly the neighbors called the cops. She swore she saw someone standing behind the shoji screen again, only this time, the figure moved. Marcus, now desperate, began researching Morita's life. He learned that in the later years of his life, Pat had struggled with alcoholism and deep personal regrets. He had spoken in interviews about demons from the past, but never elaborated. Some speculated it was about his daughter, who died in childhood. Others whispered about a woman named Yuki, a short-lived marriage he never publicly acknowledged. The house, it turned out, was the last place he'd called home before his health deteriorated. He hadn't died there, but he had lived alone in it for a stretch of years marked by illness and isolation. One of the previous owners, an elderly woman named Deborah, agreed to meet them. She told Olivia quietly, "There's something unresolved in that house. He was a gentle man, but he didn't die at peace. Some spirits don't stay angry, but they stay." They didn't hire a priest. They didn't burn sage. Instead, Olivia and Marcus did something simple. One evening, they set up a small corner altar in the reading nook, just in front of the shoji screen. A framed photo of Morita, a small cup of sake, and a note, handwritten in both English and, Google translated, Japanese. "We respect your presence. We hope you find peace here. Thank you for letting us stay." That night, Olivia slept through for the first time in months. The hallway light never flickered again. The whispers stopped. Every so often, Marcus still plays the Karate Kid in the background as he works. And sometimes, if he walks past the shoji screen at just the right hour, he swears he sees a soft ripple in the light like someone bowing, just out of view. They still live there, and the house is quiet now. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind moves through the palms a certain way, Olivia swears she hears a voice on the breeze. Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. It was early October when the quiet began to feel unnatural. The kind of silence that doesn't settle, but hums beneath the surface like the breathless stillness before an earthquake. Marcus had always been a rational man. Someone who liked knowing where the pipes ran behind the drywall, who checked for drafts before calling it a ghost. But something about this silence felt aware. Not empty, watchful. Even the koi pond had changed. Once alive with movement and gentle splashes, the fish now floated low and slow, barely surfacing, their mouths opening soundlessly in the filtered blue of the water. Olivia said she didn't dream anymore. She'd wake up feeling as if she had, her chest tight and damp with sweat, but no images remained. Just the echo of something she couldn't name, a hollow grief that stayed with her throughout the day, clinging to her shoulders like static. And then the laughter started. It wasn't loud. It was measured, clipped as if coming from a stage performance in the next room. A single chuckle, sometimes two, always at night, always from the direction of the reading nook. Marcus heard it first. He thought it was the TV at low volume, maybe a residual loop from a YouTube video left running. But the screen was black. The remote still on the table. Olivia hadn't even turned it on that night. She'd been reading in bed, curled up with an old paperback she couldn't focus on. The laughter returned 3 nights later, then twice more within a week. Olivia heard it that time. She sat up in bed, slowly, her eyes wide but calm. "He's practicing," she whispered. "He used to do stand-up, didn't he? Before Miyagi." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He hadn't told her that. He'd come across it weeks ago while reading old interviews, digging into Morita's life more than he'd care to admit. Pat had done comedy early on, playing clubs in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Jokes with sharp timing and a tender undertone. A man trying to make people laugh to forget that he rarely did. The laughter never lasted more than a few seconds, but it left a trace, like smoke in the air, and after it faded, there came the faint creaking of the shoji screen. It moved just slightly, just enough. One evening, Marcus sat in the armchair across from it with a drink in his hand and a growing numbness in his legs. He stared at the screen for over an hour, not daring to blink for too long. There were no footsteps, no cold draft, just the subtle shift of the screen as if someone or something passed gently behind it. Like a curtain moved by the breath of a memory. He called out once, "Pat?" No reply, just the distant sound of a chime, though they had no wind chimes. And outside, there was no wind. By mid-October, Olivia's mood had shifted entirely. She had stopped wearing makeup, stopped laughing. She began walking barefoot across the house even when it was cold, pausing in doorways and staring toward empty corners like she was waiting for something to approach. Marcus started watching her more than he watched the screen. It was subtle at first, the changes, but he knew her rhythms. He knew how her mind wandered, how her fingers tapped at the lip of a coffee mug when she was anxious, how she hummed tuneless melodies while cooking. All of it was gone. Now she stood still too long. Her eyes didn't scan a room anymore, they locked onto corners, shadows, and held there. And once, he caught her murmuring quietly to herself in the laundry room. When he asked who she was talking to, she smiled at him slowly, gently, and said, "He's not alone anymore." Marcus didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the koi pond long after midnight, watching the dull flicker of fish beneath the surface. The water was unusually clear that evening, like glass. He thought he saw something, not a fish, not a reflection, but a face, just beneath the surface. A man's face, expressionless, watching. The next day he emptied the pond. There was nothing inside except the fish. But as he drained the last few inches, he noticed something stuck in the filter, a long black hair, coiled like a ribbon, far longer than Olivia's and slick with something that smelled faintly of rust and incense. He tried to show her. She wouldn't look. That weekend, she moved her reading chair behind the shoji screen. She said the light was softer there, that it felt more natural. She spent most of her evenings sitting cross-legged in its shadow, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. Sometimes her eyes were closed. Sometimes he wasn't sure if she was breathing at all. And sometimes, though he tried not to watch, Marcus saw the screen shiver beside her, as if someone had settled down beside her. He stopped playing the Karate Kid after that. He stopped entering the reading nook altogether. And now, as the air grows colder and the days shrink into dusk earlier and earlier, Marcus has begun to dread the nights, not for what he hears, but for what he doesn't. For the new silence that's come, not the silence of a house at rest, but one bracing for something to begin. The days grew quieter, and with that quiet came a stillness that settled not just in the house, but in the people inside it. It had been 3 weeks since Olivia began spending her evenings behind the shoji screen. Marcus had stopped asking her questions. Every time he tried, her answers were too calm, too practiced. She spoke with a kind of distant kindness, as if explaining something to a child who wouldn't understand. Sometimes she would speak of the house as though it had lived long before them. "It remembers things," she'd say, brushing her fingers along the wooden frame of the window. "But it doesn't mean harm. Not yet." Marcus started working later hours just to avoid coming home while the sun was still up. He'd drive aimlessly after work, sometimes pulling into grocery store parking lots and sitting there with the engine off. The silence in the car, even with the faint hum of traffic nearby, felt safer than the silence inside the house. When he did return, Olivia was always in the same place. Behind the screen, a small cup of tea beside her, sometimes cold, untouched. She never looked up when he came in anymore. Not even when he shut the door harder than necessary. Not even when he dropped his keys on the tile. She would just remain there still, head slightly tilted, eyes half closed, like she was listening to something just beneath the surface of the room. Marcus had never been a man of ritual, but lately, everything he did had become one. Shower with the bathroom door open, lights always on, never pass the screen without looking away, and never, ever open the closet in the guest room again. He couldn't say exactly why. He just knew if he did, something would change. Something would start. The koi pond remained dry. He told Olivia he was going to refill it, even bought a new water filter. But every time he went out back, something about the cracked lining of the empty basin, the way it looked like it had been burned from within, made him pause. The fish were gone now, given away to a neighbor. The pond had become a hole, a reflection of something they didn't want to name. Then the scratching began, soft at first, like a nail brushing lightly against drywall. It always came from the far side of the shoji screen, the part that touched the corner of the living room. It would happen late, around 2:30 or 3 a.m., sometimes when Marcus was on the couch, trying to sleep with the television playing nature documentaries at low volume. He would hear the first scratch, then a second, longer one. It wasn't frantic. It was patient. He considered rats, even called an exterminator, but the man who came found nothing. No droppings, no chewed wires, no nests. The next night, Marcus pressed his ear to the wall. No sound, no movement, just cool wood and the smell of incense. Not the kind they burned. A different scent, old and dry, like what you'd smell in the back of an empty Buddhist temple. The scratching resumed as soon as he lay back down. He didn't move. The next morning, Olivia greeted him with a smile. A real one. It was the first time in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, but she seemed clearer, somehow lighter. She made eggs, toast, and asked him if he wanted to go for a walk later. The air outside was cooling down, she said. The palms were beginning to brown at the tips. For a few days, everything almost felt normal again. Until the night Marcus woke up to the sound of the front door opening. Not creaking, not slamming, just the subtle click of the latch releasing, and the gentle swoosh of air that followed. He got up slowly, barefoot, and stepped into the hallway. The air was colder than it should have been. Olivia was already standing there, barefoot too, wearing only a t-shirt that hung just above her knees. She was staring toward the shoji screen. Marcus followed her gaze. There was light behind it. Not bright, but unmistakable. A faint golden glow, as if a lamp had been turned on in the space behind it. But they hadn't placed any light source there. It was a corner. Nothing but wall and carpet. The glow moved, slightly, like candlelight shifting as someone passes in front of it. Then the shadow appeared. Not a shape. A figure. Clearly human. Clearly standing. Marcus stepped in front of Olivia, slowly, arm out, but she didn't move. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes were locked on the screen. Her lips parted slightly as if about to whisper. Then the figure bowed. Not quickly but deeply, with reverence. Just like in the films. Hands at its sides. Head dipping low, respectfully, slowly. When Marcus blinked, it was gone. The light faded behind the screen. The hallway returned to silence. And Olivia, without a word, turned and walked calmly back to bed. Marcus followed her but didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the doorway, listening to the faint ticking of the old clock in the kitchen. The bowing figure played in his head on loop, not frightening but final, like the end of a ceremony. He couldn't help but wonder, what had he just witnessed? A goodbye? Or a welcome? And then came the rain. It hadn't rained in weeks, not since late August. But now, in the dark hour before dawn, the wind picked up and droplets began tapping against the window panes. Not enough to call a storm, just enough to remind them of something. Marcus walked into the living room and stared at the shoji screen. The wood seemed darker now, the paper slightly yellowed. He thought he could hear a murmur coming from behind it, low and melodic, like a lullaby. He stood there, unsure whether to speak or step forward. And behind him, in the dim light from the kitchen, Olivia whispered one word. Yuki. The name hung in the air long after Olivia whispered it. Yuki. Marcus didn't ask her who that was. Something in her tone made it feel like a name he should have already known. Like it had been there all along, spoken in the hum of the walls, in the corners of every room, in the footsteps they pretended not to hear. The rain continued through the morning. A steady tapping against the window panes, gentle and insistent, like knuckles on glass. That day, Marcus called in sick to work. He didn't tell Olivia. She had retreated behind the shoji screen again, where she now spent most of her time. She ate her meals cross-legged in that shadowed space, her plate resting on a folded towel, eyes never leaving the wall before her. He noticed she no longer reached for her phone. No books, no laptop, just silence and breath, like someone in meditation or mourning. Marcus stayed in the kitchen for hours, staring at the hallway, listening. That evening, he found the old storage boxes in the garage. They were still sealed from the move, covered in dust, marked with black Sharpie office, books, miscellaneous. But at the bottom of the stack, he saw one marked simply, closet, bedroom A, the guest room. He didn't remember packing it. Inside were things he didn't recognize. A pair of white slippers worn nearly flat at the heel, a set of rosary beads coiled in a Ziploc bag, and a framed black and white photo. A young Japanese woman, maybe early 20s, standing in a narrow garden, smiling softly at the camera. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her hair was pinned up in a traditional style. There was no name, no date, no frame, just the photo, brittle and faded around the edges. But something about her eyes felt familiar. The same dark stillness as Olivia's when she sat behind the screen. Marcus carried the photo inside. Olivia looked up from her place in the corner but said nothing. He placed it on the floor in front of her, gently. Is this Yuki? Olivia stared at it, then slowly reached out and turned the photo face down. Not anymore, she whispered. That night, the scratching returned. Louder, more deliberate. The sound of nails across would 5 strokes, pause, 5 more. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding, staring at the screen. And then, without fully meaning to, he stepped forward. He pulled the shoji screen aside. The corner was empty. No chair, no lamp, no Olivia. Just a bare patch of carpet and a faint outline on the wall. A discoloration in the shape of a human figure, arms folded. As if someone had stood there for a long, long time, pressed gently into the fabric of the room. He spun around. The living room was empty. The hallway, the kitchen, no sign of her. He searched for hours, called her phone, opened every door in the house, even the one in the guest bedroom. The closet there groaned when he pulled it open. And inside, folded neatly on the floor, were the same white slippers from the garage. No dust, no cobwebs, as if someone had just left them there. Marcus didn't sleep. When the sun came up, he sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the screen, waiting. He called the police at 6:45 a.m. They filed a missing persons report, walked through the house, asked questions. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. One officer mentioned maybe she'd wandered off. Stress, maybe. A recent argument. But Marcus hadn't argued with Olivia in weeks. They hadn't talked in weeks. She had been listening to someone else. The police left without answers. A day passed, then 2. Marcus stayed in the house, barely eating, barely sleeping. On the 3rd night, he heard the sliding sound again, the soft swish of the shoji screen being pulled aside. He didn't look. He couldn't. And from behind the paper-thin wall, he heard Olivia's voice. Not panicked, not frightened, just calm. He wants you to listen, too. Then silence. That was the last time he heard her voice. Months passed. The listing for the house quietly returned online. A brief blurb from the realtor. Tranquil mid-century home with original design, garden views, and custom woodwork. Previous owner relocated under private circumstances. No mention of Olivia. No mention of the screen. No mention of the name Yuki. The koi pond remained dry. The house is still there, tucked beneath a slope of pines. Modest, quiet, unassuming. A neighbor swears they sometimes see a light glowing behind the screen in the evening, long after the new owners have gone to sleep. No one talks about what happened. No one visits for long. And the screen remains untouched, unmoved, watching, waiting. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.